Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yes.
Today, we're diving deep into how to get research right.
Okay.
Before we even collect
Yeah, before the data.
any data.
Right.
It's like carefully choosing the ingredients for a recipe before you start.
Exactly. The solid foundation is everything.
We're looking at a paper today called An Ounce of Prevention is Worth a Pound of Cure.
Improving Research Quality Before Data Collection by Herman Aguinis. It's pronounced Aguinis.
Guinness.
Yeah.
Like the beer.
Hey, God.
And Robert J. Vandenberg.
And this deep dive isn't just for academics.
No, not all.
Even if you don't consider yourself a researcher.
Right.
You encounter information and research.
Every day.
Every single day.
All the time.
So understanding these principles can help anyone.
It's like having a built-in BS detector.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
The authors lay out 3 key areas to focus on.
Theory, research, design, and measurement.
Uh-huh.
Let's start with theory.
Okay.
Have you ever felt like there's just so much information out there that it's hard to know what's actually true?
All the time. And the authors point out a big culprit here.
Okay.
Something they call theory proliferation.
Theory proliferation.
It's like,
what is that?
Everyone's coming up with new theories, but not enough people are rigorously testing them.
So it's like a garden.
Yes.
That's totally overgrown with plants. Because no one's weeding out the ones that aren't thriving.
Exactly. It becomes hard to see what's truly valuable.
Aguinis and Vandenberg suggest.
They suggest.
Going back to basics.
Okay.
And looking at philosopher Karl Popper's work.
Karl Popper?
Popper.
Yeah.
Argued that for a theory.
For a theory.
To be truly meaningful.
To be meaningful.
It needs to be capable.
Capable.
Of being proven wrong.
And being proven wrong.
It should make risky predictions.
Risky predictions. Yeah.
That could potentially be disproven by evidence.
That could be disproven.
He called this falsifiability.
Falsifiability.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If a theory can explain everything.
Right.
It's probably not very useful.
Not very useful.
Because that doesn't help us make specific predictions. Or understand the nuances of a phenomenon.
Right. It's like saying people behave the way they do because of their personality.
Right. Yeah.
Sure, that's kind of obvious.
That's true.
But what specific personality traits are linked to what specific behaviors?
Yeah, and under what conditions?
Exactly. A good theory gives us a framework for asking more precise questions.
So it's not enough.
It's not enough.
To just come up with a new theory.
Yeah.
We have to put it to the test.
We have to test it.
See if it holds up under scrutiny.
Under scrutiny.
But even before we get to testing, we need to ask ourselves. Are we even asking the right questions in the first place?
Ooh, that's a great segue into the next part of this deep dive.
All right.
Because Aguinis and Vandenberg have some really interesting thoughts on that.
Okay, let's hear it.
So Aguinis and Vandenberg highlight the importance of asking research questions that are not only interesting, but also important.
Okay.
And they use this fascinating anecdote about Richard Hamming. Who was a brilliant scientist who worked on the Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project. That's the one that developed the atomic bomb, right?
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
But Hamming wasn't caught up in the complex physics of the bomb itself. Instead, he was deeply concerned with a much bigger question.
Which is?
Would detonating the bomb ignite the atmosphere and wipe out all life on Earth?
That's a big question.
Talk about a high-stakes research question.
Wow!
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while most of us aren't dealing with questions of that magnitude,
of course,
it illustrates the point that truly important questions can shift our entire understanding of a topic or challenge deeply held assumptions.
It's not about just, adding another publication to your resume.
Exactly.
It's about pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
Right.
In a meaningful way.
Aguinis and Vandenberg also argue that the best research doesn't stop at generating knowledge. It should have a practical end in mind.
A practical end.
They point out a problem that exists between the world of research and the real world.
You mean like how sometimes research findings seem really interesting?
Precisely.
But don't really translate into anything useful?
They call this the science-practice gap.
Science-practice gap.
And they suggest a solution.
What is?
Adopting a design science approach.
Design science approach. What does that involve?
It means shifting our focus from just describing what is to imagining and designing what could be.
What could be?
Okay. Think about it like this.
Okay.
Instead of just studying the causes of employee burnout, a design science approach would also focus on developing and testing interventions to prevent burnout.
So it's about moving beyond just...
It's about moving beyond...
understanding a problem.
Yes.
To actually creating solutions.
Exactly. Now, even with a great question and a solid theoretical foundation, we need a robust research design to ensure our findings are reliable.
Reliable.
And one of the biggest challenges researchers face is something called low statistical power.
Okay. Break that down for me.
Okay, imagine you're trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Okay.
If your haystack is small, you're more likely to find the needle, right? But if your haystack is massive, you might miss it.
Yeah, even if it's there.
Even if it's there.
So in research, the haystack is our data.
A haystack is the data.
And the needle is the effect we're looking for.
Precisely.
Okay.
Statistical power refers to the probability of detecting a real effect if one exists.
Okay.
And many studies are designed in a way that makes it really difficult to find those needles.
Even if they're present.
Even if you're present.
Why is that?
Several factors come into play.
Okay.
But one of the most important is sample size.
Sample size.
The number of people we collect data from.
Okay.
The larger our sample, the more likely we are to detect smaller effects.
So if we're trying to study something that has a small effect on people.
Yes.
Like maybe the impact of a particular leadership style.
Okay.
On team performance, we need a larger sample size to be confident in our findings.
And the authors highlight the importance of using power calculators.
Power calculators.
Tools that help researchers make informed decisions about sample size based on the type of effect.
So it's like planning a road trip.
It's like planning a road trip.
And making sure you have enough fuel to reach your destination.
But what if a large sample size isn't feasible?
I'd imagine that's often the case.
Absolutely.
In real-world research.
And that's where being strategic about other aspects of our research design becomes crucial.
Okay.
For example, we can consider adjusting something called the alpha level.
The alpha level.
Which basically reflects our tolerance for making certain types of errors.
I remember hearing about the alpha level and p-values in my stats class.
Yes.
But it was always a bit fuzzy to me.
It can be a tricky concept.
Yeah.
But the basic idea is that we set an alpha level, usually 0.05.
0.05, okay.
Which means we're willing to accept
a 5% chance of finding a statistically significant result, even if there's no real effect.
So we're trying to balance being cautious about not seeing something that isn't really there.
Yes.
With being open to the possibility that we might miss a real effect.
Aquinas and Vandenberg argue that instead of blindly sticking to that 0.05 threshold, we should think more carefully about the relative consequences of making different kinds of errors.
So in some cases, it might be more important to avoid missing a real effect than to be absolutely certain that we're not seeing something that's not there.
It all depends on the research question and the potential implications of the findings. They also introduce the concept of Bayesian analysis.
Bayesian analysis.
Which offers a different way of thinking about statistical evidence.
Now, I've heard of Bayesian analysis, but it always seemed very complicated. It can be, but the core idea is pretty simple. Instead of just asking, is there an effect? Bayesian analysis helps us assess the credibility of different explanations given the data we observe.
So it's less about black and white conclusions and more about understanding the weight of evidence for different possibilities.
It's a more nuanced way of looking at the data. But even with the most robust statistical analyses, we still need to be careful. About drawing conclusions about cause and effect.
Right, because correlation doesn't equal causation.
Exactly. Just because two things are related doesn't mean one causes the other.
Right.
There could be other factors at play that we haven't even considered.
So how do we strengthen our ability to make causal inferences?
Well, Aquinas and Vandenberg suggest looking back at James' 10 conditions for causal inference.
10 conditions.
These conditions. Provide a checklist.
Okay.
For researchers to consider when designing and evaluating studies.
So things like having a strong theoretical rationale.
Yes, strong theoretical rationale.
For the causal relationship.
And making sure the timing of our measurements supports the idea that the cause comes before the effect.
Okay, makes sense.
Exactly. And even when we can't do a true experiment with random assignment, which is often the case in organizational research, we can incorporate principles of quasi-experimentation.
Quasi-experimentation meaning?
Using design elements that help rule out alternative explanations and strengthen our causal claims. For example, longitudinal designs, where we track changes over time, can help us see if changes in the presumed cause actually precede changes in the effect.
That makes sense. And I remember from the paper that Aquinas and Vandenberg also mentioned something.
Yes.
Called latent class analysis.
Latent class analysis.
What is that?
It's a statistical technique that helps us identify subgroups within our sample that might be at different levels on the variables we're studying. This can be really helpful in understanding how relationships might differ across groups of people.
So it's like adding another layer of nuance.
Exactly, adding another layer of nuance.
To our analysis.
But even with careful attention to design and analysis, we often need to statistically control for other variables that might be influencing our results. That's where control variables come in.
Control variables,
But Aquinas and Vandenberg caution against using control variables just for the sake of it.
For the sake of it,
They emphasize that we need to have a strong theoretical rationale for including a control variable. And we need to be clear about how it might influence the relationships we're studying. Otherwise, we risk introducing bias.
Bias or
muddying our understanding of the core variables of interest.
It's like adding too many ingredients to a dish.
I like that analogy.
You might end up masking the flavor.
Of
the main
components. And finally, we can't forget about measurement. Even with a brilliant theory, a compelling research question, and a rock-solid design, our findings are only as good as our measures.
Because we can't just assume that a survey or a test is actually measuring what it claims to measure.
Absolutely. Aquinas and Vandenberg highlight the concept of construct validity.
Construct validity.
Which basically means how confident are we that our measures are actually capturing the underlying constructs we're interested in? And this is especially challenging when dealing with complex and abstract concepts like motivation or leadership.
It's like trying to measure happiness.
Exactly.
Just by asking people how much money they make.
There's clearly more to happiness than just wealth.
Absolutely. And the authors highlight some innovative approaches to improving measurement, like using
computer-aided text analysis.
Computer-aided text analysis.
To study things like company mission statements or leadership speeches.
Exactly. And they also mention video-based techniques. To assess behavioral constructs in more realistic settings.
Wow. That's fascinating. So it seems like there's a lot we can do. To improve research quality. Even before we collect any data.
By investing time in carefully developing our theories, crafting important research questions, and choosing appropriate research designs and measures, we can significantly increase our chances
of generating meaningful and impactful findings.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for the complexity of research and the importance of critical thinking when evaluating information.
And remember, these principles apply. Whether you're a researcher conducting a study or simply a consumer of information trying to make sense of the world around you.
Exactly.
Always ask yourself, what's the theory behind this claim? How is the research designed? And how are they measuring the key concepts?
Those are great questions. To keep in mind, a huge thank you to Herman McGinnis and Robert J. Vandenberg for their insightful work. And thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.